Hey guys, how are you? Hope you're all doing very well. This evening I'm going to be doing a review of an action film from France, French language, English subs, and it's also got a little bit of Arabic language, released in the year 2010, directed by Rachid Boucharab, and this movie is called Outside the Law. And the story to Outside the Law is as follows. After losing their family home in Algeria, three brothers and their mother are scattered across the globe. Massoud joins the French army fighting in Indochina. Abdelkader becomes a leader of the Algerian independence movement in France, and Said moves to Paris to make his fortune in the shady clubs and boxing halls of Pigalle. Gradually, their interconnecting destinies reunite them in the French capital, where freedom is a battle to be fought and won. So this movie depicts the Algerian fight for independence in the 1950s and 60s. You've got three brothers who at the start of the film have fallen victim to the French occupation. They've been kicked out of their home in Algeria, and they're facing very unfair sort of consequences as you know the French have occupied this country and have taken over the land. So three of these boys, they're brothers, they're very close, and from an early age they gain a hatred of France and they want a better Algeria. So as time goes by, three of these brothers get separated. Some go into the war, the French war in Indochina, and another one goes to France, where he runs some very shady nightclubs, and another guy is in prison for an independence movement that he's in trouble for. So as the movie goes along, all their destinies lead to being once again reunited in Paris, and this is where they start to plan their uprising in order to try and get freedom for their beloved Algeria. So what happens at that point on, and whether or not they succeed in what they do, is something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on Outside the Law. I really enjoyed this film, and I didn't really expect myself to like it as much as I did. Now what I loved about it is, on one hand, it's a throwback to gangster films of the in the 1950 era, of America. It has, the sort of Tommy gun sort of, the cars, and it does pay strong resemblance to gangster films in America, during the 1950s. So if you like that kind of style of film, you're going to like this one. But what I liked about it is also a historical sort of film, and it shows you Algeria's fight for independence and what they were up against and how unfair the French occupation was. And so straight away you gain a lot of sympathy for these guys' cause. Straight from an early age, they're moved out of their house by force, and you get the sense that it's really not fair. So Algeria and the Algerians living there deserved a lot better. So as the movie goes along, they are faced with hardships. Some, do better than the others. But when they all reunite, they have this idea that they're going to have an uprising, they're going to do some terror attacks, and they're going to get Algeria back. So although they're doing a good thing for their country, they're doing it in a very negative way, in causing havoc in France. So it's basically a movie that has a lot of shades of grey. So that's what I really liked. And it's not so much siding with the Algerians, it's showing you that sometimes to get what you want, you've got to do it by force, and that can bring consequences. So I like that. It had very, strong shades of grey. It wasn't saying we're the good guys, they're the bad guys. So that was a welcome breath of fresh air, and I thought that was really well done. It's very easy in these sorts of movies to side with one person or with one cause. But then when the Algerians are starting to do what they do, you feel to yourself that, yeah, they're trying to get something for a positive outcome, but the way they're doing it is not positive. So it's basically just people doing bad things to each other, and it's just a back and forth, and that's where the action comes into it. There's some really good action scenes, but the movie wouldn't be called a flat-out action. There's drama, there's a little bit of funniness, there's some shocking violence, and it all goes at a really brisk pace. Now, unfortunately, there comes a problem where it felt that this movie should have been a mini-series, in that it had a lot of information, but it seemed to condense itself down considerably into making it a feature sort of 133-minute film. Now, it definitely warranted a much longer viewing, because it felt like it had all of these grand ideas, but then when they belted them all together, they had to cut down all of it. So, for instance, in one scene, you've got this explosion happen, and it was really thrilling, and then all of a sudden it cuts to a year later. So all of that thrilling aspect is lost straight away, and you think to yourself, well, what happened after this explosion? Why is it cut to a year later? It feels like there is a lot missing, and therefore I thought that with such a monumental story, it would have been better being a mini-series or just a really long film, because it felt like they were cutting some stuff out. And I can understand that, with the budget, and they've got to make it, not something ridiculous in length, but it felt that for the story of this magnitude, it needed to be drawn out a little bit more. So it didn't feel like it was chopping from one moment to the other moment, and it felt like it was missing a lot. So that is a negative of the film, but that's pretty much the only negative I can think of, because the acting was fantastic. The three leads were really rich in depth, and that's why these actors showed off their talent. If you're familiar with French cinema, you will know these actors, the three main leads. I thought the direction really paid them favours, because they had a lot to play with. They're very rich in colour. You gain sympathy for them, and at the same time you sense that they're losing their mind. In that the further they go with this uprising, the more they're losing their humane sort of element, and that they're becoming these cold-blooded, mindless killers, and that the cause was getting too much. And it shows you what that can do to people, in that you're trying to have good intentions, but what you're doing is just as bad as what you've been facing. So it is a struggle. It's a struggle between good and evil from each of these characters, and I thought that was just really, really, really well drawn out, and I thought the pacing of the film allowed that to happen. Therefore, it allowed these actors to portray very interesting characters. The soundtrack was very good. Cinematography is excellent. As I said, a very authentic 1960s feel to it. Some of it is in Algeria, some of it is in France. It's not a pretty sort of film, in the fact that it's not in these rich sort of areas. There's these three brothers grow up in very poor environments, the slums. So it's a depressing kind of outlook in that regard. And then when they're fighting for their freedom, it's not so, as I said, because they don't paint them black and white, good versus evil, you get a sense that what they're doing is, as I said, good intentions, that they're trying to free their country, but they realise to free a country you have to do some pretty awful things. So there is a little bit of a sour taste. Although they are trying to do the right thing, it's just getting a little bit out of hand, and then they start to regret what they're doing. So once again, that's a realistic approach, is that you don't get these, sometimes you get these films where they kill, and it doesn't affect them, and it feels that they're just programmed to kill, and that they don't have any remorse, and it just takes a little bit of realism out. But these characters had a lot of remorse, and therefore you could gain sympathy for them. Although they were doing horrible things, you felt to yourself that, yep, the cause is getting too much. It's getting to their heads, and that they're clouding their judgment a little bit. Thought the ending was fantastic, but as I said, it really would have benefited from being a longer film, maybe a mini-series, because it was such an interesting story of the Algerian resistance, but I just thought for 133 minutes it wasn't paying it total justice, because there were parts that I felt were cut out, and it leaves you wondering what happened in those areas that they left out. So that was my only criticism of it. A very good film. If you're a fan of gangster movies, then definitely check this one out. And on top of that, you get a very interesting story about Algeria fight for independence from the French in the 1950s and 60s. So overall, for Outside the Law, I'd highly recommend this. I really liked it, and I'm going to give it 4 stars. Alright guys, that's my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies, and I'll see you later.